What's going on, everybody? Matt Manduke here.
I'm sensing awkwardness, am I right?
This video is one that I did a long time ago. I want to say way back in 2016. I know that's not that long ago, but it's long enough ago where most of my subscribers have probably not gone back and seen it. This video is the video of all the cars that I've owned. A brief description of them. I'm going to show the images as I go, so you're not going to be looking at my face the whole time. And I'm going to, talk about, what problems I have with them and what I did with them, as well as what led up to the van, ultimately why I'm in the van, and, where I'm going to go from here. Without further ado, because this is a fairly long list, I'm going to start. But before I get into that, I want to say if you're new here, click that subscribe button. It's that little wiener in the corner. You just click that and it'll explode into all kinds of wonderful entertainment. I post new videos every day, and I'm sure that you will be entertained as I am entertained in everything that I post and everything that I do. I do it to share it with you, whether it's stories about my life, my angry series, which is primarily comedy, my traveling, or how to go about doing things like living in my vehicle. Hit that subscribe button and you will be enlightened or entertained or both every day. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the show. My first vehicle was a 1992 Chevy S10. It wasn't all that beautiful. It was blue and white. It had a broken driver door. Must be a Chevy. It was a 2.8 liter, 6-cylinder throttle body with a manual transmission. I bought it off my sister's boyfriend at the time for $500. And really, it was just a car that came to me. I cannot complain about the vehicle as it was fairly dependable. I had it for about 8 months, and ultimately I had to take it off the road, not because it had a bad heater core and I didn't know anything about cars, but it ultimately didn't overheat with the bad heater core even in the summertime. The problem why I took it off the road was the driver door that didn't work did eventually fall off, and the police told me I had to take it off the road. So after the 92 S10, I moved into a 93 Chrysler Concorde. I want to say I got it for like $2,200 or $2,800 or whatever. It had low miles. It was like 75,000 miles. It was all highway miles. It was something a friend of my mom knew, and they just wanted to sell the car to move on into something newer and nicer, because by then we're talking about the year 2000. I only had the car for about a month. I had full coverage on it because I financed the car, and ultimately I got into a car accident with it. It was my fault. I stuck my nose too far into traffic and it got hit. Now, after the car got hit, I moved into an 88 Chevy Astrovan, which was another actually very good car, and it was my first van. I had the Astrovan for about a year or so. It was my mother's car. I bought it off of her, I want to say for $1,500 or something like that. It was relatively high miles. It had bad rings, but it had a 2.8 liter V6 motor, and it was an automatic. It was decent, and more or less what I did with it was what most young teenagers did at the time. I was working at a factory, and I put a stereo system in it. I took out the middle seats. I left the bench seat in the back, and me and my friends used it for all kinds of fun. We went off-road with it. It was a rear-wheel drive, because Astrovans are actually not like other minivans. They're actually built on the S10 setup, as opposed to most of your minivans are built as cars, so they're front-wheel drive. The Astrovan was a rear-wheel drive, and it handled pretty much like a truck, much like my Express does. After the Astrovan, I had a 86 Chevy Celebrity, and that was a hunk of crap. I only had it for about 2 weeks, and it had a horrible oil leak, and there was nothing I could do about it. It ended up seizing the motor and going. By the time I even realized it had a problem, it was over. After the Celebrity, I had an 83 Ranger. The 83 Ranger had a very similar problem to the Celebrity, and that left me high and dry in Franklinville on the side of the road. So after the Ranger, because I got that from Andy and Lynn's, which is a used car dealership that used to be in Port Norris, who was distantly related to me, and I say was because the owner has deceased, God rest his soul. He was a good guy. He was in bands with my dad, and he was actually a good guy. But he did sell me some junky cars. He gave me a 92 Daytona, which only lasted a day. The transmission went. The thing was a turbo, and it overheated, and the transmission seized all in like the same thing at the first time it overheated. He took that as a defect, took it back, and I actually financed a 1972 Chevelle, which I had for about 8 months. This thing had a 396 in it. It was a 4-speed manual. It was badass, but I didn't know how to maintain a car, so I ended up breaking that. During the Chevelle, I was kind of sharing with my friend Fred, who was actually Remington Reeves, his 88 Tempo, because it got better gas mileage. This thing was cool because like the shifter pattern was so loose, like there wasn't actually a guide there, and like first gear was as big as a track is on most manual transmissions. And I mean, I drove my S10, that was a manual, and it was, 5 on the floor, and this thing had a shifter and was still looser than really anything that I've ever driven. It was insane. Like fifth gear was on the other side of the car, or at least that's what it felt like. After the Chevelle broke, I actually got myself a 93 Ford Festiva, which was a great car. This car, there wasn't much to it. It was about the size of what the smart cars are today. This thing was a 5-speed manual. It had like 93 horsepower, but it got 58 miles to the gallon, and it drove like a go-kart. I enjoyed it. It was a great car, but I lost my license because the day that I got it, I got into a car accident and it wasn't insured yet, and so I ended up losing my license for uninsured driver. After getting my license back, which was about 2 years or so, because I slacked off. During not having my license, I had one of those 43cc gas-powered scooters. I also rode my bike a lot, and I did a lot of walking. I saw it as my punishment, and I just kind of went with it. I got my license back. I got a 88 Bronco 2, which was a friend of my stepdad was selling it. It just had a rebuilt transmission at like 120,000 miles, and the transmission in it only lasted about 30,000 miles. Later, I would find out that shifter had a little plastic pin in it that would like come loose and fall into the transmission, and the pin was thicker plastic than the gears inside of the transmission, so the little pin would just wreck the transmission. It was the A4OD, the worst transmission ever released to the American public, and that says a lot because it comes from Ford, and Chrysler builds some really bad transmission. We'll get into that on another video. The next vehicle after the Bronco 2, I got a 91 Toyota Camry. This thing was an automatic. It had a 2-liter. I loved the car. It got 45 miles to the gallon. I drove it for about a year and a half. I got it for $900. It was like 115,000 miles. I think the only thing I ever had to replace on it was I did my oil changes by then. I did a spark plug on it. I was actually maintaining vehicles by then because I'd been through hell with vehicles. But not all of my fault, but a lot of it probably could have been prevented had I maintained them properly. But this Camry, the only thing other than regular routine maintenance, brakes and oil changes and whatnot that I had to do on it the entire time that I had it was a CV axle. But realistically, we were talking about 2005 by then. It was a 91, so the car had seen some years. It was 14 years old. The Camry actually got into a head-on collision, which is a story that I'm going to tell at some point, probably relatively soon, because I tell it on a fairly regular basis. But I miss the Camry. Even to this day, I think if I didn't get into that car accident, I might still be driving it. Even though I do feel the damage of not having airbags. If you have that option, get airbags. But most cars nowadays, if you're buying them used, you're going to get airbags because everything 96 and up has them. The next car I had after the Camry, I got a 2001 Chevy Cavalier. I was delivering pizzas at the time. I drove that for probably about 4 months before harmonic balancer went. And with the harmonic balancer, it took the entire motor out of whack, and it ended up, it was just not worth repairing. Like a motor mount snapped, all kinds of stuff went wrong with it. I took that car and traded it in on, this is January of 2007, a 2006 Scion XB, which was the only brand new car that I've owned to date. I bought it with 34 miles on it, and because I was delivering pizzas, I owned it for about a year and 2 months before I got into a car accident with that. Now, that was a great car. It got 35 miles to the gallon. It was a 5-speed manual. It had plenty of room inside of it. It was comfortable. It had, the MP3 player and all that stuff. Nowadays, that kind of stuff's standard, but in 2006, that didn't always happen. And I loved the car. And then ultimately, I got into the car accident, and it was actually worth $18,000 when it got totaled, and I only bought it for $13,500. So I was happy that it was worth more because I didn't have any gap insurance. So the actual payment paid off, and I had a lawsuit that went with that too. But I was still pending the lawsuit from the Camry, so that was complicated. After the XB, because I was still making car payments on the XB when it was time to start driving again, I got myself a 1990 Nissan Sentra. This thing was an odd car. I got it with like 500,000 miles on it, which, you know, it is what it is. I got it for like $300. It got 58 miles to the gallon, which goes on par with that Ford Festiva, but it didn't have any options. Like, it didn't have a cigarette lighter with it. It had crank windows. The door locks didn't have the little things on the door, and you had to get out and turn the key. Now, I did pull out the radio and put an MP3 player in, and I actually ended up at some point wiring a cigarette lighter into what would have been there if it was dealer installed, if anybody ever got anything on there. And the wiring had it set up so it was only working when the headlights were on. I still enjoyed that car, even though it was a pile of Gosa, because it got great gas mileage and it handled pretty cool. However, I ended up having to take it off the road because I was delivering pizza in Cape May Courthouse at the time, and when I was rolling down the road, I started noticing this little nipple poking up out of the hood. And when I got out and looked, the strut tower had ripped, and the strut was touching the hood. So I crippled it home and parked it. After the Sentra, I got a 1991 Nissan Maxima. I love that car. It was an automatic, but it had the overdrive disengage, and it had 3 modes to the transmission. It had a sunroof that would automatically close itself if the car was off for 20 minutes, so you couldn't leave it open overnight. It had dual climate AC, where, not like today where, you know, the driver and passenger get different things, but actually a different dual climate that I actually preferred. It had a dual climate where you could have your heat on your defoggers and still run the air conditioner through the vents, which was very nice in the summertime on like a foggy day when you just needed that. It also had cornering lights. It was sporty. I had it tuned a little bit because I found out that it was the same motor as the 300ZX, so I ended up having it chipped so it made 220 horsepower out of the naturally aspirated engine at 220 horsepower because of the way I was driving it with synthetic oil and, you know, iridium plugs, and just the way I was driving it, keeping it above a half a tank as much as I could afford. It was averaging 32 miles to the gallon out of a 3-liter 6-cylinder. Great car. After the 91 Maxima, I had a 97 Honda Civic. This thing was like a Frankenstein motor where it had a VTEC and it was a DX car. It broke every week. It got 47 miles to the gallon, so I can't hate it, but I was used to driving a Maxima. And I took the Maxima off the road with 482,000 miles because the transmission was starting to slip. So when I got the Civic, I was expecting it to be a decent car because the guy I was working with kept telling me that Hondas were great, and he had like an SI and thought it was badass. And ultimately, the best that I could tell you was a Honda Civic feels fast, but it's not. It took me a very long time to get used to the Civic being as slow as it was because I was so used to the Maxima being so fast. But to be realistic, it had more than double the horsepower, and it was more than double the car in every way, as it should be because the Maxima is a better car. However, the Civic wasn't as fast as the Sentra was, or the Festiva, or the Camry. And we're talking about older cars that shouldn't have had as much technology in them. And they weren't all manual either, so if the Camry was faster than a manual Civic 1.7 liter VTEC, there's something wrong with that. So after the Civic broke, I ended up borrowing my mom's 2000 Firebird before she traded it in. I had that for a little while. It had a 3.8 liter V6. It was a T-top. It had candy coat. It changed from green to blue to purple. It was a beautiful car. I shouldn't mention it because my mom still misses it because she traded it in for a CRV. It was a great car. I drove it for a while, and the way that I drove it, it ended up averaging 28 miles to the gallon on the highway and 24 miles to the gallon city, which was awesome on top of that. But that's because it had some pretty aggressive technology in it for what it was for a 6-cylinder Firebird. I also managed to race against a handful of cars that could not stick to me, which is a whole other set of stories. I raced against some stuff with the Civic and whooped it that I shouldn't have too. Actually, I've done that with pretty much everything. After the Civic, I ended up picking up another 91 Maxima off a friend of mine that was a 5-speed, hoping I would be able to use it as a parts car and put the manual transmission into the automatic car, because the automatic car was in great shape. But when I bought it, I realized that everything on it was trash. The guy that had it, before me didn't maintain it, and probably not the guy before him. I was like the 4th owner, and the best thing about the car was that it was a stash box, and I got a bunch of power tools and stuff out of it that I managed to sell to recoup the money that I spent on the parts car. But I did drive it for a little while, and having a manual Maxima was pretty damn badass. But it not having brakes, I was glad it was manual. After that Maxima, I got a 96 Altima, which I bought off of my parents for $3,000 in 2010. This car had 12,000 miles on it, and when I got it, I got 12 miles to the gallon. After I drove it, tuned it up, replaced the EGR valve, and did a handful of things, I managed to get it up to about 22 miles to the gallon. But out of a 2.4 liter 4-cylinder, I expected to get better gas mileage than I did out of the Nissan Maxima, which was a 3-liter V6. The Altima was a great car, though. I only had to replace a handful of things. I did tune-ups on it. I replaced a couple things. I had to do tires on it, I think, once. I replaced the brakes on it once. I ended up putting a DVD player in it and painting the dashboard glow in the dark. I worked at AutoZone most of the time that I had it. I lost my license while I had it for a DUI. I got caught on the highway doing 170. So I lost my license for 3 years for that time. Not just because of the DUI, also because I had a lot of points. They dropped the speeding ticket, thankfully. It sat, I got it back on the road, I put a more stereo system into it, I drove it for a long time more. When I sold it, it had 68,000 miles, and I still got $2,000 for it. I picked up an 89 F-150 because I needed a truck for, my dad died, and I had to actually move a lot of the stuff from there. And the 89 F-150, it was a piece of poop, but I enjoyed it for what it was. It was stuck in 4-wheel drive. I used it to go to the flea market. I used it to off-road. It was actually a fairly decent car for what it was. I mean, I got it for $500, and I really couldn't complain for, what it was. I mean, you're talking about 2015. It was 26 years old. Averaged 18 miles to the gallon when it was in 2-wheel drive, and then when it got stuck in 4-wheel drive, it got 12 miles to the gallon. In 2-wheel drive, a 5-liter V8 was getting better gas mileage than a Chrysler 300 with a V6, and the same gas mileage when it was stuck in 4-wheel drive. Pretty sad, but it was good for the F-150. Then, after the Altima and the F-150, I got what I am sitting in today, what I'm recording today, which is the 2000 Chevy Express conversion van that I've owned for the past 4 years, and ultimately, I don't owe it anything. I got the car for $4,000. I sold the liftoff. I had to do the multifunction switch, which is in a Chevy, well, this thing. It has the turn signals, the wipers, the cruise control, the everything. Washer fluid, everything. I had to replace that. I've had to do brakes twice. I am currently doing ball joints, and I've had to do tires a handful of times because it is a heavy vehicle. But I've lived in it. It has averaged between 22 when it was new to averaging 16 now, with needing tires, high resistant tires is at that. And it actually needs an O2 sensor and a couple other things now, and ball joints. So I really can't complain about that, because it's a 5.7 liter V8, and it is factually faster than a Hemi Charger with a 5.7 V8, and it has more power than a Hemi Ram. I live in the vehicle, and you can check out how I go about doing that in this corner video here, and that's where I am now. Now, where I'm planning to go from here is either possibly into another van or into a tractor trailer. If I go into the tractor trailer, of course you will be seeing videos of that. We'll see how that goes as I apply for it. Now, if you enjoyed this and you want to see any of my other stories or what else I'm on about, you can check out this playlist here. Or if you want how you can win one of 3 rings, you can check out that playlist there. As always, guys, I want you to like the video, subscribe, and if you're really feeling happy, you can pick yourself up a Angry Manduke coffee cup. Thanks for watching. I'll see all my friends later.